guys. My name's Dave. If you want to check out my feed or follow along while I talk, you can find my Instagram at dave.krugman, Krugman, and there's a dot there. I'm not the other Dave Krugman, but I'm glad to be here. So what I kind of wanted to talk about was a little more about like my personal work and the stuff I do outside of the stuff I do at the agency and the things I do. This is, I've always loved photography, and to me there's this expression about luck, which is luck is when preparation meets opportunity, and that to me is always applied to photography as well. A good photograph is when preparation meets opportunity. So to be ready and to be always living each day like it's some visual game where you have to leave that day with one share-worthy moment or to get the best image you can. It's a really fun way to live and a fun way to observe the world. And so that's kind of the underlying current that runs through my photography is always be ready and be prepared and always keep your camera on you and you never know what kind of beautiful thing you can catch. So this is kind of a collection of images where that kind of held true for me. These moments where I was like, seeing something that I've always wanted to photograph and being ready by having my camera, but also being ready by understanding, the equipment I have and the experience, having the experience to be able to create an image in a moment that can be very fleeting, like this image you see right here. So I'll just scroll through a little bit. I might pause, I might not, depending on what happens. But so this is a night. I always love like this kind of Blade Runner look that New York can have under the right light. And with the right circumstance, these steam vents that come up through the ground lead to all these really interesting, moments and patterns, and it kind of makes this landscape of New York very dreamy. So this is a night where I've never seen the steam this thick. It was, there's a wind blowing through, and it was pushing the steam down into the streets, and I just thought it was a very cinematic kind of scene. Unfortunately, I had my camera on my shoulder, and I was able to capture it. So I'll share a few images from that. And this is right on 32nd Street in New York. So this figure you see here is actually the shadow of the figure behind it. I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing that like without the medium of the steam, you wouldn't be able to see like the depth of that light, and you can see like kind of how the light is working and this cab coming through. So that was just a moment that I liked. Again, this goes back to a lot of what people were saying about how everybody has a camera now. Like how many of you guys? I mean, this is kind of a biased crowd, but how many of you guys have a camera? Whether it's your phone or a DSLR or something like that. A lot of people.
Pretty much everyone.
So what I've noticed is when I'm walking around the streets, I've been shooting for a long time, and only within the past few years I've noticed that a sunset will stop 50 people in their tracks now, right? And it used to be that everybody would go about their business, but now everybody's capturing the moment. And if another thing that happens is if you stop and take a picture, you look behind you, somebody might be taking the same picture because they saw you, and the fact that everybody has access to these tools has led to a lot more photographers. And I bring this up to say that in this moment, you see somebody taking a picture, you see another person celebrating this visual like glory that they haven't experienced before, and that to me was it's something that I love to see. Is like even if I'm not taking a picture, I'll see some beautiful sight and I'll see 50 people capturing that moment. I think it speaks to this new age we're in, where there's visual literacy is a lot higher, which leads to more jobs for photographers and leads to a deeper appreciation of the visual art. Another thing I like to do is kind of make, I shoot with a Sony A7, the A7 series. And what I love about that camera is you can really mount almost any lens to it with adapters. So I use a lot of vintage lenses, and to me it kind of has the same quality that other vintage things might have. Like, if you're a record collector or something, there's a certain quality that just, and a certain look to things that just doesn't exist in modern technology anymore. So by combining modern technology like the Sony system with old glass, like old Leica lenses. This is a 50 millimeter Leica lens that I've adapted to the Sony. You really get this look that you just can't really achieve with the standard glass. So I included this as an example of that. Like, you know, you could take the shot just straight down 6th Avenue, or, you know, maybe try to focus on like the particulate in the air. This is during a snowstorm. So your equipment that you use and constantly changing and swapping things in and out, I think, is a really interesting way to get different types of work and different types of photography. Again, a similar scene, you know, looking for something that's a little more unique than just, you know, the snow on the streets or something like that. This picture I included because I want to talk a little bit about you know, the idea of always being ready, and this is an example where I was just stuck in traffic coming up 5th Ave, and it was pouring out, and we're moving like at a snail's pace, and I kind of decided, I was like, you know, this looks really beautiful right now. Like, could I create a whole set of photos stuck in traffic on 5th Avenue in the back of a cab? And so I did, and I, you know, it ended up just being a fairly typical shot of raindrops on a window, but the scenes passing behind it kind of created these almost painterly scenes that I really liked, and it just goes to show that you can gain so much from constraints, you know. So maybe challenge yourself, or like pick some sort of theme or something like that, and just see what you can do with very, you know, stuck in a 2 foot by 3 foot space. You can still make a good photograph. Again, you know, similar idea, but a little bit more inclusion of the setting. This image I included, this is in Miami. Something that's always fascinated me is that, you know, everything you see is reflected light. So when you're looking into a puddle or another reflection or something, really you're just adding another layer of reflection to that light. I've always loved that idea that you can just keep adding layers and getting all this stuff, and it's like, to me, what's happening on the bottom isn't any less real than what's happening up top, because it's just reflected light when it comes down to it, and how you perceive that, you can do a lot of crazy things. This is a shot from my roof in Brooklyn. I shoot up there a lot because it's, you know, it's very accessible, and, you know, if I come home from work and I don't have time to go out and shoot, it's a nice scene. But sometimes you get these crazy cloud formations, and I just thought that this was an interesting a juxtaposition of like distance and closeness and all these different types of light and stuff like that. Portraiture is really, when people ask me, you know, I've gone through a lot of phases in my life about what type of photography I enjoy most. I think that all the photography I enjoy includes people in some aspect, whether it's street photography or documentary photography. What holds it all together is like the human element. And to me, a portrait is like the quintessential photograph. Like I love working with different people and finding out like how I can capture them, or, you know, the interaction between the setting, the equipment, the photographer, the subject, and the viewer is something that you can play with, and that's always been at the core of my photography is you know, how do you tell somebody's story? This image I actually shot during a video series for Adorama, you know, the Through the Lens series. I don't know if you guys have followed this. It's a really great series by Salvatore, who works here. So you can Google that if you want to check it out and see the behind the scenes of how I got this shot. This is another example of using vintage glass. This just has a depth to it that I wouldn't be able to really achieve with the standard equipment that I would normally be using. Mm-hmm. Again, you know, kind of capturing emotion and the setting, and this is snow falling, and it's all lit because of this, you know, the bright lights of the parking garage behind it. But, you know, you don't need a studio to create good work. So, you know, this is one of the best cities in the world to be a photographer, and it's really amazing. Yeah, this is just a portrait in Miami, shot with a Leica camera. One of the most common questions I get, sometimes I'll ask on Instagram, I'll say, you know, hey, like, do you guys have any questions? Hit me. One of the most common questions I get is, you know, what are you shooting with? What lens is that? What aperture are you at? And a lot of the time it's from people who are just starting to learn photography, and they want to know, I want to be a better photographer. I want to learn composition and all this stuff. What camera should I buy? And really, what I think that the best camera to learn on not the best camera in the world, but the best camera to learn on for a variety of reasons is a cell phone or smartphone, because it has so many advantages. It has connectivity, so you can really get your work out there as much as possible and share it. It has like a view screen that is better than most LCDs on digital cameras, so you can really look at your work and zoom in, and it has all these different apps that can really help you understand photography. So I'd say if you're somebody who's just kind of putting their foot in the water, you don't need to go out and spend $2,000 on some camera. You can really you can get pretty far in terms of learning, what storytelling means and what composition means and what balance means with just a cell phone. And then when you're really ready to make that investment, you'll be much better equipped, no pun intended, to make that purchase decision. So if you're intermediate, I would say you can buy a camera. But if you're really just getting started, I would highly advise you to use a smartphone. Again, this idea of reflected light, and to me, this is an example of you can make a portrait a lot stronger by using a lot of direction. It's kind of awkward when people stand there, like, when I'll take someone's portrait, they'll be like, what should I do? And a way that I've found, I certainly didn't invent this, but a way that I've found is really helpful is tell them to look at your hand, right? So if you want, then you can just kind of move them around, and you don't have to be like, oh, look at that thing over there, or something like that. So for this picture, this is an example of where, this is my friend Benjamin Heath, who's also, you should check him out on Instagram. He's an incredible photographer. But I wanted his reflection looking straight at me, because in this image, there's more weight on the left side to me, because it starts to blend into the texture on the right. But the eye contact can kind of counterbalance that. So your eye is, you're not drawn all the way to the left, and you're just like, oh, there's a reflection on the side. It's really, he's looking right at you in the reflection, so you start there, and then you see that it's actually a portrait of him to the left. So just about directing your subject and using the elements in your surroundings, and it can be really fun to do things like that. I liked this shot. To me, it's an example of using available light. I'm a huge proponent of ambient light. I will shoot with strobes for certain work, or use the flash to light up certain things, or but I really love the challenge of saying, okay, this is at night. There's one light bulb available. How can we make a compelling image with this scene? And I think that this is an example of where you can achieve that. Is there's always room to make an image. Even if there's nothing around you, I think that you can pull something out of it, and that's always been part of the thrill of the challenge of photography.
Is this at Jacob's Pillow?
Yeah, so this was actually shot 2 days ago at Jacob's Pillow, which is a dance institution in Western Massachusetts. And I included this to kind of as a segue into to talk about some work I've done over the past few years with various institutions. I've worked with the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the New York Public Library, the Intrepid Museum, and I've also, worked with Ellis Island, the Guggenheim, and kind of bringing this idea of everybody has a distribution platform, and I think it was something that was brought up earlier. It was it's not just people with printing presses or people that run magazines that need content. Every single brand now needs content because they need to have a presence. So what that means is there's a huge vacuum right now where every brand needs visual content. And that's, they say everyone's a photographer, so nobody's a photographer, but I don't really think that's true. I think that the supply of photographers is far higher, but the demand has risen to match it. So it's really, I think it's an exciting time if you're into this stuff. It's a really there's no better time to be getting into this industry, where I've heard a lot of naysayers say that social media is killing photography, but I think it's just the opposite. I think it's I think we're kind of in a golden age right now, and content and creators are going to be in very, very high demand. And this is an example. Jacob's Pillow invited me out because of they wanted content for their Instagram feed. So now if you look at their Instagram feed, it's a lot of my work. And that can be a great collaboration. So a great way to get into this industry and to get into doing branded content and work is be proactive and go reach out to places and be like, here's my work. I can help you guys. And they'll be so grateful to you if you can provide them with some good stuff to help them grow as a brand. And then, it all comes back around. So, so these images were created the other day for that purpose. The last thing I'll say about this series is, so this is the same guy. And I just, I photoshopped him, and I didn't move him in the frame at all. So this is his actual distance from himself. And I wanted to include this image because, to me, it really speaks to something that is amazing about photography, which is that photography gives you the ability to kind of shift time, and it's almost like an incredible add-on to your long-term memory and your short-term memory. And this is an image where you learn more about his movement by being able to see it in two different times at once, right? Because he's almost reacting to himself. And if we showed these images separately, I don't know if that would come across. So playing with time and shifting time is a really interesting way to take your compositions to the next level. I didn't plan for this shot, but when I was going through and post-processing, when I was flipping through them, I saw that it almost looked like he was, reacting to himself. And so I wanted to layer those images and really bring that home. The last thing I'll say before we move on is that going back kind of full circle to the idea of a good photograph being when preparation meets opportunity. There's a shot that I've always wanted to get of New York, which is this shot, which is kind of this doesn't happen that much in New York. It happens a lot in Chicago, where you get this really low cloud cover. You have these buildings poking through, and it's really phenomenal. So I've been traveling a lot, and I realized that if you sit in the A seats flying into LaGuardia, one of the flight paths that you get when you come into the city is you get this incredible sweeping view. As you fly over Brooklyn, you get all of Manhattan, and I always book A seats just in case something cool happens over the city. And I can't tell you, I've probably spent money on it. I've spent a lot of time and energy and effort getting window seats. I've switched flights before. And most of the time there's nothing. Sometimes it'll be night, or it'll be, I'll have a dirty window, or
the wing's in your way.
Or the wing is in my way. Or I try to plan against that. Or another problem I just had flying in was the jet stream, from sitting behind the engine, actually will blur your shot. So I was fortunately far enough back in the plane where I could shoot above that jet stream. But the point is that I was prepared and I was ready, and when this moment came, I was so thrilled to get this shot, and it kind of epitomized that first quote that I said to you guys, which is be ready, be prepared, and know that when that moment happens, you are there with your camera. And I just thought this was a good example to illustrate that point.
Very cool. That's great. Well, thank you. Fantastic work. Great to see it all.
Thank you.
So I guess the reason Dave and I know each other, and I think this will kind of lead into what we're talking about, is about a year and a half ago,
Yep.
We did something at Esquire, which I'm the photo editor for Esquire magazine online. We decided to host our first ever Instameet. And an Instameet is where a bunch of people will come to one place and photograph that place, or an event or whatever it is. And it kind of all rolls out on Instagram. And we invited, people had to apply to come, but we also invited people who are sort of pillars of the Instagram community. And I reached out to Instagram to ask for some names, and the first one that they mentioned was Dave. So Dave, I guess I'm sort of fascinated about how you obviously have a love of photography. You obviously, are a photographer and you do really great work, but you also seem to have this element of being able to get yourself in the door almost anywhere. So what I was introduced to you with was the Empty Met series. And can you talk a little bit about the Empty Met, Empty Ellis Island, Empty...
Yeah, so I think you guys can see this, right? Yeah. So, first of all, the Esquire thing was great.
Yay.
I think that's such a good project.
Thanks for coming.
So, this was a couple years ago. I was introduced to a guy named Taylor Newby, who works at the Met, and he runs their social media presence. And if you go to @Met Museum, you can see the work that they're doing, which is really, really great. They have an incredible account. When I first got into Instagram, I was just using it kind of casually, and I'd kind of just document my life and post 1,000 times a day and not really think about it. And then I saw some work from somebody. His name's Chris Ozer, another great photographer to follow. And I realized that he was using it in a way that was like almost portfolio, right? And people were really reacting to it. And he was getting thousands and thousands of likes. And that's a moment where I thought, wow, like this is actually a real platform for. It's not a platform just to take photographs. It's a communications tool, and it's a communications tool for visual information. And it's really the first time that we've been able to communicate peer-to-peer fluidly with visuals. When else? This is one of the first times that was really streamlined so much that we can just all engage and consume content like that. So I was walking at the Met, and I noticed that everybody I was looking at was that same experience of seeing 1,000 people and everybody's taking pictures. And I was a little bit turned off, and I was like, this place is so beautiful. Everyone's just on their phone. But I realized that what they're doing is kind of breaking down the walls and then sharing it outside of the institution. And maybe people that would never get the opportunity to come there in person now have an opportunity to see it. So together with Taylor, we kind of wanted to develop a way to scale this up and say, hey, we want to really break down the walls and really show this, show this space to the outside world. So we invited a lot of photographers, and if you guys want to look at this stuff, it's community.davekrugman.com. Because I wrote a lot about it too, but I'll spare you that because I can talk a lot too. The idea was we want people that are highly followed to come in, and we're going to give them exclusive access in order, in exchange, they're going to help us promote the Met. So it's really simple, no money changed hands. It was just kind of like a symbiosis between the photographers and the institution. And it led to some really cool stuff. We had time. It's such a different experience when you go there and there's nobody there. You have time to really lock in, and it's almost like I always go in, whenever I'm in there, I end up whispering because it's just so quiet, and I feel like I'm in this like holy space or something like that, or But then Taylor will be like, you don't have to whisper. Like, oh yeah. But the idea is let's show this space and let's invite creators, and then the institution can actually become a part of the creative process and not just the end game of the creative process. Yeah, so if you guys want to look through this at your own leisure.
So you did it first of all, where were you that you were able to meet Taylor?
I was connected with him because I wrote an email to the Met, and I wrote like a whole pitch and proposal and about why I thought it was important, and I'd be a little embarrassed to send that email now because I think it's like this long about how smartphone people, 90% of people between the ages of 18 and 25 in a certain income bracket have a smartphone. So I was trying to show that if advertising is getting people's attention, we should be on they should be on Instagram. And then, that kind of filtered through the channels to the right guy, and that right guy was Taylor.
Which is pretty great. So in some ways, you are still kind of playing out that like being prepared and also kind of moving at the right time and all that sort of thing.
I think the key thing to take away from here is that this wouldn't, it had a lot to do with being proactive. I saw a need that they didn't even quite know that they had yet. And it wasn't until I was like, I'm not asking you guys, I'm not trying to get you guys to write me a check. I think this is a cool idea. That can be a really great way to get your foot in the door. And then, what happened after this was that it got some press. Thank you. Because I actually met somebody at the Esquire event.
Yes, right.
And then it became really easy because then I could just send a link to an article and say, can I do this with you? And people would.
David, a nice New York Times profile.
Yeah.
which was very lovely and very well deserved. But you've also then done, there are other ones. So there's like empty Guggenheim,
Yeah, so I did not set that up, but I was an eager participant in that. And it's cool. I mean, they've done it at the Louvre. They've done it at
it's a movement.
the Tate. Yeah, it's going all over the world. And people ask me, they're like, does that upset you that other places are doing it all over the world? And no, it's just the opposite. It's amazing. People reach out to me from different countries, and I'll send them all the information I have about how to get it done, because it's not something that I take ownership over. It's just an idea that I think can help a lot of different places and a lot of institutions. So I think that everybody should do it and embrace it. And I'm a huge believer in like the free sharing of ideas. I think that we especially in this age when we can all share and help each other and connect peer-to-peer through devices, we should all be building on each other and sharing that information and not be reclusive. And to me, photography, when I started out, was a very solitary craft. It was like, go out, you're on your own, you're doing your project, you're telling your story. And now that so many more people are interested in it, and so many more people have a platform through social media, and they have tools through their devices, it's really become a community pursuit, or at least the way I like to do it and the way I like to think about it. I think that's kind of changed what photography means in a really interesting way.
What does that mean? It's a community pursuit, or what? If you could talk a little bit more about that.
So traditionally, I always found that being a photographer, you're kind of isolated a little bit, and I know that I don't mean this with 100% certainty. There's always been photo communities and stuff, but the more people that are interested in something, I think the bigger the communities around it grow. So just the fact that everybody has access and visual literacy is so high, I think it's an incredible thing. And so these communities rise around it, and there's so much that you can do with a community with united voice. And there's a lot of room for social work, and I've seen people come together. My friend Dan Cohen has a incredible initiative right now where he's trying to connect nonprofits with influential Instagrammers and influential photographers, and that's an example of how I see the community side of photography really rising more than like this idea of like the Ansel Adams of the world going out on a pursuit and just getting it done. So I think that it's kind of opening up photography to a lot of collaboration, and I think that everybody's learning faster, and everybody is, we're consuming more media than we've ever consumed in our lives, and then immediately after consuming that media and learning from it, we get to put it back out into the system and see how the community reacts to it. And that's something that I saw being hinted at with Flickr and other social networks, but I think the simplicity and ease of Instagram and the fact that it's in the palm of your hand has really amplified that to an incredible degree. I've seen people who started photography a year ago, they're now some of my favorite photographers, and it's just because if you have drive and you have a purpose to your work and you really truly love it, you can learn faster than ever. You have more resources at your fingertips than ever before. I think that's great.
Yeah. Were you initially how did you get into photography initially?
So my grandfather and my father were like avid hobbyist photographers. I kind of just picked it up from them, always having cameras around the house. And I actually still, a lot of the old lenses I used with the Sony A7 were my grandfather's. And then my father had them, and now I get to use them. So I've always felt like it, since I was maybe 9 years old in a dark room at camp, I remember just being like, I want to do this. This is awesome. I remember like that moment, I took a picture of some rowboats or something, and then I was watching it come like in the developer fluid, just kind of like, it was like magic. And that's something that I don't get to experience a lot anymore, but the magic of it is still there for me. And so I studied psychology at Boston University, kind of played with the idea of going to art school and never really made it. Actually didn't. I took a lot of photojournalism courses, did very poorly because I always would just pursue my own kind of interest, and even regardless of what my professor said. But then, immediately when I graduated, I was like, I need to move to New York. And I think somebody said earlier that New York is, the media hub of the world, and that's absolutely true. I wanted to be like close to that fire, so to speak. So I moved to Brooklyn as soon as I could. I was fortunate enough to get a job in Annie Leibowitz's studio for a year. And then I got to see, I didn't even understand prior to working there the depth and breadth of the photo industry. I was always told that you could never make money doing it. I mean, my parents were very, very supportive, but some teachers and guidance counselors steered me away from the arts. And I'm glad that I was able to steer it back, because you absolutely can make money from it. And I think now more than ever. So I would encourage people to, with any interest in it, to pursue it.
How did you, so now you have a follower count on Instagram of nearly 200,000 or something. Mm-hmm. How did you start building that network? I know that you are a big community member in the sense that you do a lot of different events and you reach out to a lot of different community or a lot of different Instagrammers. You're obviously a big fan of the platform. But, what do you think allowed you to start kind of really gaining this presence?
So it really started with the stuff at the Met. But I don't need to be specific to that to say what I'm going to say, which is it's about doing something that is different. It's about networking, and it's about doing things for the sake of doing. If you have a good idea, my advice would be, if you have a good idea or you see an opportunity that somebody hasn't, taken a shot at yet, be that person. A lot of the reason I have the followers that I do is because of the press I got. And the reason I got press is because I was doing something with a platform that was a little different, and it was also at a time where that platform was very popular and people wanted to write about it. So just kind of look for opportunities, and I also reached out to a lot of people that had large followings and was just like, hey, I'm a huge fan of your work. Would you look at mine? And I ended up meeting some of those people, or having something to offer somebody, saying oh, do you want to go to the Met when it's empty? And they'd be like, okay, cool, yeah. So if by standing in the middle of that relationship between the artist and the institution, you're associated with that, and that can help you grow as well. But this is also kind of a good, it made me think of something, which is a lot of times people will say, oh, I only have 1,000 followers, I'll never get more, or something like that. And then I like to say, I'm like, that's 1,000 people that are looking at your work. If you told me 5 years ago that I could press a button and 1,000 people would see my work instantly, I would have told you were crazy. So just because somebody has 1 million followers, or just because somebody has 500,000 followers, even 550, that's a new thing, and that's amazing. And it only takes one person to change your life. So don't get discouraged by numbers. And a lot of it is, it doesn't matter so much to me personally. I'm sure it matters when a brand approaches me and they want me to talk about their product or something like that. They're definitely taking that number into account. But as artists, we can get more validation and more connection and build deeper bonds than we ever could before. And that's all because of these social networks and these devices. I think that's the thing to focus on. And just one day at a time, just put out good work, post every day. Consistency in timing and tone and content will get you a long, long way.
Do you think, just following up on something that Mark said before, obviously for you, you're getting various different engagement or gigs or whatever and you're also at BBD&O,
right.
Where presumably you're developing social media strategies, campaigns, things like that for brands, which is fantastic and really cool. And if you ever need an assistant, let me know. But for a lot of people, there are a lot of incredible photographers who are on Instagram, and I've talked to them as well, and they're like, yeah, it's great, I have 600,000 followers, but I'm not really getting jobs out of it. Mark was saying he feels like we're maybe moving past the point where people are being hired for things because they have a high follower count or because they have that reputation. Where do you think we're at? And
That's a very interesting question. So I think initially when Instagram came out, you couldn't really advertise on it as a brand. They had a very limited, even when they did announce advertising, they had a very limited scope. And they're like, we'll pick the key brands that we want on the platform and we'll let them do it slowly. And they're about to open up the gates to everybody. And the reason I bring that up is because when you have a very active community and you have 300 million users and you have brands that are desperate to get on in that space and you don't allow them to advertise, you're creating a vacuum, and that vacuum is going to be filled by something. What ended up happening is brands went directly to people on the platform who did have reach and did have their own distribution channels, and they relied on them to get their message out because they didn't have any other option. I see that world kind of fading as they introduce sponsored advertisements. But a follower, having followers and having a good social presence is extremely important still because of what I said earlier about, it only takes one person. The people who are giving you the gigs, it's just networking, right? It's the people you know. And, if you have 100,000 people following you, the likelihood that somebody's going to reach out to you out of those 100,000 people is way higher. So I wouldn't say it's not important to have a high follower count because you want to have that's you having a deeper network, right? And let's say that I post a shot and it's like, this is not a real example, but let's say Coca-Cola approached me and was like, hey, we want you to post this bottle of Coca-Cola, like make something cool with it. I said, okay, I do that. And then so I post that on my feed, and then all of a sudden 100,000 people see that I did that. Maybe one of those companies is a rep for an alcohol company, and now they're like, oh, he can do like stuff related to drinks. So you just want to have like a really deep layered network so that it's a numbers game. If 1% of the people that you interact with are going to hire you, 1% of 100,000 is higher than 1% of 10,000. So. It's more about networking. I think it will be more about networking and meeting people and having a deep network than it will be about selling that space. It's going to be less of a distribution channel and more about content.
Interesting. Yeah. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I guess a final question, and this is like, sorry to sort of be weird about this, but let's just assume that tomorrow there was no Instagram, there's no social network, there's nothing like that anymore. We go back to where we were 5, 6. How old is Instagram? 6 years old?
Yeah,
somewhere in there. But pre-Facebook days, which seems like impossible to imagine. But that was the world for a very, very, very long time. But now you, as somebody who has advanced, obviously you're very talented, but you've also advanced because of your ability to understand how these networks and platforms work. They all go away. What would you do to continue to grow your reach and your brand?
I think I'd invent Instagram. So this kind of goes back again to Instagram as a platform for visual communication, right? So why is the New York Times so valuable to advertisers? And like why is a Super Bowl ad $1 million for 30 seconds? And why do magazines exist? And it's all because they are subscription-based distribution networks. Brands want to put their messages in front of you. The way they do that is by exploiting distribution networks, right? So before Instagram, before social media, we had distribution networks, right? That's all the media that we're used to. It goes you can go all the way back, right? From the town crier all the way up, and then the printing press comes along, and there's an explosion of information. You're starting to see pamphlets distributed, and then radio comes along. It's this new communications tool, and I'll skip many, many years, and then we get to the internet, and we get to the mobile internet, what we're seeing now is individual artists who are the owners and the editors and the creators behind their own distribution networks. A photographer with 500,000 followers is essentially a magazine editor that has control of 500,000 subscriptions. That's tremendously valuable. So the model hasn't changed, the medium is changing. And it will continue to change and evolve as new communications networks, get developed. So I think that, to answer your question at long last, I would find whatever the most relevant distribution channels were in whatever era you plopped me in, and I would try to figure out how to, try to be in control of that. And I think that what's happening right now is such a great time or such a great thing for artists, because artists traditionally would rely on a whole slew of different, editors and art buyers and all these different layers that it can be really hard for an artist to navigate, and it can actually take away from the process of creation. And now, a brand will reach out to me and they'll say, here's your creative brief, but we want you to do your thing. And that to me is the most heartwarming thing I can hear from a client when, in a creative field, a lot of times you're at the mercy of so many different people in that chain of command. It's very freeing to have your own distribution channels. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm very excited to see what you do next.
Thanks.
You're always doing something new and fascinating, and I'm constantly inspired and impressed. So, well done.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much.
Thanks, guys.